Carl Jung, How to Find Your Soul. Ever felt like you've got everything you're supposed to want in life, yet something inside just feels empty? Like no matter how much you try to fill it with success, money, or relationships, there's this void that just won't go away? That's exactly what Thomas felt too, until he discovered something profound that completely shifted his life. He found an answer in a dusty old book by Carl Jung, and that book showed him how to unlock something he didn't even know he had: his soul. Today, we're diving into his story and exploring Jung's ideas to see if they might hold the missing piece you've been searching for too. Imagine you're living in a city full of life and lights. You're surrounded by people, technology, and everything you need to feel connected. But still, there's this feeling of loneliness, an emptiness that won't go away, no matter what you do. For Thomas, this was everyday life, and it was only when he stumbled upon Carl Jung's work that he began to understand that maybe, just maybe, the emptiness he felt wasn't something to run from, it was something to explore. Today, we're taking a deep look into Jung's philosophy on finding your soul. So if you've ever felt a mysterious emptiness in your life, stick around. This video might just change everything. Thomas was what most people would call successful. He had a great job, a nice apartment, and a small circle of friends. He was financially stable, surrounded by people, and technically living the good life. But every night, when the world quieted down, Thomas felt alone and empty. On the surface, he was doing fine, but inside, there was this sense that something important was missing. It was like a faint voice, whispering that there had to be more to life than this constant routine, more than just checking off the boxes society handed him. But he couldn't figure out what it was. One rainy evening, Thomas found himself wandering into a little bookstore he'd never noticed before, almost as if he was guided there. He spotted an old book titled Memories, Dreams, Reflections by Carl Jung. He wasn't particularly into self-help books, but something about this one felt different. He started flipping through, and a passage about the soul caught his eye. It described how in our fast-paced world we're taught to look outward for happiness and success, yet real fulfillment only comes when we look within. Thomas felt as if Jung's words were written just for him. They resonated with that empty feeling he'd been carrying, and he knew he had to dive deeper. As he read further, Thomas learned about Jung's idea of individuation, the journey to becoming whole by uniting the conscious and unconscious parts of ourselves. Jung explained that most people never really face themselves. They're busy, distracted, and frankly, terrified of what they might find. Instead of dealing with their true selves, they bury their feelings and dreams. And every time they ignore that inner voice, it becomes harder to hear. Jung believed that finding one's soul meant facing everything we try to hide about ourselves, no matter how painful. Thomas decided to start small, following Jung's advice to spend just 10 minutes each day in silence. It sounded easy, but he quickly realized it wasn't. In that quiet space, a flood of old memories surfaced. Moments he'd long forgotten, insecurities he'd buried, and painful experiences he'd never fully processed. These weren't just memories. They were emotions he hadn't wanted to face. Each one was like a piece of a puzzle he'd locked away. Sitting there, he felt his heart racing, tempted to run from the feelings, to drown them out with his phone or a distraction. But something in him wanted to know more, so he kept at it. As days turned into weeks, Thomas noticed an interesting pattern. When he let himself feel those emotions without running away, a strange thing happened. They started to lose their grip on him. He could feel each memory and then let it go. Slowly, he felt like he was peeling back layers, finding parts of himself he didn't know he had. It was as if he was discovering who he truly was underneath all the masks he wore. But it wasn't all smooth. Along with his introspection came vivid, sometimes disturbing dreams. In one recurring dream, Thomas found himself standing on a dark beach, staring out at a pitch-black sea under a stormy sky. He noticed a shadowy figure standing at the water's edge, looking out into the distance. Thomas tried to approach, but with each step, the figure moved further away. He woke up from these dreams feeling a strange mix of fear and curiosity, wondering what his mind was trying to tell him. He soon learned that Jung had a name for these experiences: the shadow. According to Jung, the shadow is all the parts of ourselves we try to ignore or repress. It holds our shame, fear, anger, everything we hide from others and often from ourselves. Facing the shadow, Jung said, is essential for true healing and finding the soul. This realization hit Thomas hard. He'd spent so many years hiding parts of himself, pretending to be fine, ignoring his true thoughts and feelings. He wondered what he might find if he stopped running from his shadow and began to confront it head-on. One night, as Thomas was reflecting, a memory hit him like a wave. As a child, he used to love drawing. Whenever he felt sad or lonely, he'd lose himself in his art. But his father had dismissed it as a waste of time, and over the years, he'd convinced himself that drawing wasn't worth pursuing. Thomas felt a pang of regret. This was a piece of himself he'd buried so deeply he'd almost forgotten it. Determined to reconnect with that part of himself, Thomas bought a sketchbook. The first time he picked up the pencil, he was hesitant and rusty, but as he let his hand move freely, a familiar sense of calm washed over him. It was as though he'd found a lost language, a way to speak to himself that words couldn't capture. And the more he sketched, the more memories surfaced, both good and bad. He could feel his emotions pouring out onto the paper, layer by layer, as if his soul were speaking to him through each stroke. Then came a breakthrough. In one of his dreams, he was lost in a dark forest, feeling a growing sense of panic as he searched for a way out. Just when he thought he couldn't take it anymore, he saw a faint light in the distance. It wasn't bright or overwhelming, just a small, warm glow that seemed to call to him. Thomas awoke with a profound sense of relief, realizing that this light symbolized his journey. He had spent so many years running from himself, lost in his own fears, but now he could see a way forward. As months went by, Thomas felt himself changing. His days weren't just a series of tasks or routines anymore. They were an opportunity to explore his inner world. And in small but undeniable ways, he noticed the world around him reflecting his inner journey. Strange coincidences began to appear. He'd think of an old friend and they'd call the next day. He'd dream of a symbol, only to see it on a poster in the city later. Jung called these synchronicities, a mysterious connection between the inner and outer worlds. They felt like little signs that he was on the right path. Then one evening, Thomas looked down at his sketchbook. It was filled with images of his dreams, fears, and the realizations he'd had along the way. And for the first time, he felt something he hadn't felt before: peace. He understood now what Jung meant when he said that finding the soul was about uniting both the light and dark within us. It wasn't about chasing some idealized happiness or trying to be perfect. It was about embracing every part of himself, the good, the bad, the hidden. In the end, Thomas realized that the search for happiness wasn't about achieving some big external goal. It was a journey within, a quest for wholeness, to fully accept every part of himself. He'd spent years chasing the perfect life, but now he saw that fulfillment had been within him all along, waiting for him to slow down, turn inward, and listen. His journey wasn't over. In fact, it was only beginning. But for the first time, he felt ready to walk that path, knowing he had the courage to face whatever came his way. He set down his sketchbook, looked out at the city lights, and smiled. For the first time in his life, he felt truly at home. If this journey resonated with you, subscribe for more stories and insights.